This lecture is about what children know about communication, so specifically language, literacy, and the arts, and how we can best facilitate that type of learning for the children in our care. So as we move through the slides, we're going to be talking about children's language development, then we'll talk about their literacy development, and then we'll talk about their development in creativity, which is related to the arts. So for each one of those sections, for language, literacy, and creativity or the arts, we're going to talk about what that particular domain consists of. Then we'll talk about what children's skills in that domain are, and then we'll talk about how to facilitate their development in those particular domains. So we're going to start with language, and the first place that we need to start is talking about the two different categories of language that we need to help children to develop. So first we need to work on developing children's receptive language skills. So this is their ability to take language in, so to look at the verbal and nonverbal communications that exist in the world and how to make sense of what those say. So you can see on the chart, it is the ability to understand language that is given to us. Listening and reading fall into this. So if we're listening to someone read, if we're listening to someone speak, if we're watching somebody's nonverbal communications, receptive language comes before expressive language. So children understand things that are said to them before they can produce language themselves. And therefore it's potentially easier to develop than expressive language. So expressive language is the ability to communicate with others, to use nonverbal communication, to use written communication, to use verbal communication, but to express things that others are able to understand and utilize. It, again, tends to be developed after receptive language and therefore may be more difficult to develop.
There are various aspects of language to consider when studying language development. So this slide shows you the 6 aspects of language that are considered to be important. So first is phonetics and phonology. So phonetics is just physically producing speech sounds. Phonology is speech sounds that actually have meaning. So like the S sound in S has meaning because it implies plurality of words. So we're not really going to be talking about these 2 aspects in this lecture because those are things that come a little bit earlier in development. Children start making speech sounds earlier than preschool age, but I would encourage you to watch the YouTube video given on this slide. It will show you the difference between phonetics and phonology so that you have that kind of grounded in. What we're going to be focusing on instead is morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. So morphology is vocabulary, the words that you use. Syntax is grammar or putting sentences together. Semantics or discourse is the purpose of sentences, so trying to convey information, asking a question, doing an exclamatory statement to show excitement. That would all be related to discourse. And then pragmatics is how language is used with one another. So turn taking, not interrupting somebody, those kinds of issues would be related to pragmatics.
So now that we've talked about the 2 types of language categories, expressive language and receptive language, and the different aspects of language that are important when we are working on our expressive and receptive skills, so those aspects of language that we talked about on the previous slide, including vocabulary and semantics and grammar and all of those things. Now let's talk a little bit about what children at particular ages are able to do in terms of language development skills. So we'll start with infants and toddlers. So infants and toddlers are able to do various things. So these things that I'm talking to you about, if you look at the California Infant Toddler Learning Foundations, that's what the reference to CAITLF is down at the bottom of the slide. You'll find more information about these language skills. But typically in the first year, so when children are 0, We expect them to cry, coo, laugh, and babble. So cooing is making vowel sounds, ah, ooh. Babbling is making consonant sounds, so ba, 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 ka, 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 would be babbling. So that is what children can do in terms of expressive language very early on. They can also perceive speech sounds. So babies are so good at language that they can distinguish between very similar sounds in language, such as p and p. So b with the B and p with the P. They can distinguish the difference between those two units of speech sound, which is pretty amazing. I would really encourage you to watch the video on this slide, the one by Patricia Kuhl. It really does teach you some cool things about babies and what they can do early on. Once babies get to about age 1, they understand many, many words, so they have pretty excellent receptive language skills. They, if you watch, they understand what people are pointing at. They create action in response to people's language. They are starting to produce language themselves, so we typically see the first words around the first birthday, and that starts with what's called holographic speech. So babies speak in one-word sentences, so they do not use multi-word sentences. They do not string words together to make sentences. They use a word to express what they want. So up might mean pick me up. Are you going to pick me up? Have you already picked me up? Can you pick up that toy? Up can refer to all different kinds of things, so the power of one word. About halfway through that first year after the first birthday, then babies start to do what's called telegraphic speech, and that's two-word speech. So up me go, dog go, car go. So you can see we're starting to string together words a little bit. Then with baby's second birthday, when they turn 2, they have some words and conventional gestures, so like holding the arms up to be picked up. So able to use gestures and words in conjunction with each other to help get their needs met, to tell people things that they want, to tell people things that they're interested about. Starting to use language as a powerful tool to get their. They can also start to engage in limited back and forth interactions. So if an adult says, are you hungry? Baby say, me eat. Oh, you're hungry. You want to eat. Me eat. Yes, I see you're hungry. What should we have? Should we have broccoli or carrots? And a baby might say, caca, for carrots. So we're having that back and forth interaction, which shows that communication is now pairing both expressive and receptive language as a useful tool for communicating. So those are things that we expect to see in the first couple of years of life. So next we have our preschoolers, and the preschool milestones related to language development that I'm going to talk to you about in this slide. Those come from the California Pre-K TK Learning Foundation. So if you Google CA-PK TK, those learning foundations, and learn more about what children can do in terms of language development and lots of other developmental skills. But by age 3, we typically expect to see children fully understood, particularly by adults who know them and speak the same language as them. So we should see understandability increase. They should be able to make, 3 to 5, 5 to 10 word sentences, depending on sort of where they're at with their language development, following typical grammatical rules. So in English, we tend to use adjectives before a noun, so the red dog. Maybe in Spanish, they're using adjectives after the noun, the dog red. So they have already picked up on those grammar rules and are starting to use them effectively. They're much better at turn-taking in conversations, both with adults and with their peers, so they can have back and forth conversations with a fair number of turns. By 4 to 5, they both understand and use words for many different objects, actions, and attributes. So their language is really exploding, and they have many words at their disposal to be able to use. They can understand and use words that describe relationships. So they can use words like behind and under and um, over. That's why they love songs like I'm Going on a Bear Hunt, because it uses all of those words that describe relationships and positions. They are starting to use even longer and more complex sentences, so they may use things to combine sentences, like my mom went to the store and she fed the dog, so using and to connect sentences, or maybe the word but. So they're getting more sophisticated in their ability to construct sentences. They generally use age-appropriate grammar, so understanding sort of the rules of grammar and the language that they exist in. They can use language to communicate with people that they know, so they can tell a story, they can have a conversation about what they need and they want, and they can also start to tell what's called narratives. So really being able to have a story with a beginning, middle, and end. If you watch A Child Tells a Story, you'll be able to see a young child kind of walking somebody through a story that they would like to have them know. So our early school age friends, they can do a variety of things. So this is our 6 to 8-year-olds. They generally can talk about all the things they need to talk about, including their feelings, but don't blame them if they get kind of lost for words when they're upset, and they might just be aggressive instead. It's hard for us to have our words when we're not emotionally regulated. They know, use, and understand thousands of words. So we go from about 20, 30 words at the beginning during, that first birthday to thousands of words by the time they get to early school age. They are picking up new vocabulary at a rapid rate, especially when they are reading or being read to. Books are a great way to build vocabulary. They get even better with their storytelling skills. They can use language to talk about not just what they want and what they need and objects in the world, but their ideas and their opinions and how they think things work. And their ability to use language is quite remarkable. They can also use language to talk through problems, like how could I solve this? How can I solve this social situation? How can I solve this math problem? Definitely using language as a tool, a problem-solving tool. They should at this point be able to make all the letter sounds correctly. So if you have a child who is still unclear with certain speech sounds, this is a good time to refer them to speech services if they haven't been there already. They like to tell puns and jokes and riddles. If you've ever been to Disneyland and been on the Jungle Cruise, they love puns. When you make a pun like the Nile River goes on for miles and miles, and we're in denial about how long it goes on because it's the Nile River. So they like to use words for fun, and they love to test out bad words because that is kind of fun as well. So I did just want to talk for a moment about being bilingual, because many children, particularly living in Southern California, are either bilingual or multilingual. They speak more than one language. So sometimes children speak 2 languages, sometimes they speak more languages than that. And sometimes it may seem like children's language is delayed, but it's not. It just takes a little bit of time to code and, rise different words for different things. So sometimes a little bit of patience is needed. So that's really, if children are learning 2 languages simultaneously, it seems to slow things down, but sometimes children learn one language first and add a second language on. So if a child is doing that, if they already have their first language and then they're adding a second language or a third language or a fourth language, you have to recognize that there's going to be stages of acquiring that additional language, and that at the beginning it's going to seem like children are very quiet and they're not using any language at all. And it's really because they just have to kind of figure out, what are we talking about here? Like, what's the vocabulary? What's the grammar structure? So for a good, 6 months, we may see children who are learning their second language be kind of nonverbal, doing a lot of drawing and pointing because they're just not quite ready. And then it may take another 6 months or so for them to be able to have kind of limited understanding of what's being said to them and maybe being able to produce a couple words here and there. Then it can take up to 3 more years to have good comprehension, start using simple sentences, and then maybe another 3 to 5 years to have excellent comprehension and not very many grammatical errors. And then another, on top of that, having advanced fluency where you look like a native speaker. So if we're bringing children into schools and we expect them to be like fully ready to go with a second language in a couple years, it could potentially take all the way through elementary school and beyond to really be proficient in that second language or that additional language. So just patience and support and scaffolding. And I think that's a really important part, is not just saying, oh, we need to wait kids out until they've figured it out, but providing educational opportunities and scaffolding that allows children to have support while they're learning that new language, and many opportunities to be able to use their first language. We don't always have to be using our new language when we already have a language that's perfectly useful. So allowing children to enjoy the benefits of their first language while they're working to add on the second language. To help children develop the skills that we talked about on the previous slides in language development, we can do the following things. So one, we can make sure to use child-centered language. So this doesn't mean baby talk. It doesn't mean making up words or talking down to children or mispronouncing things like ittle bitty baby. We can think about child-centered language as focusing on words that we know children understand, pointing to words to make their definitions more obvious, thinking about how to explain things in a way that fits what children are able to understand cognitively. So that would be more what child-centered language is. We can also provide opportunities to talk about meaningful things, real things. This is called meaningful discourses. So talking about experiences that children have had, things that they're currently playing with or that they like to play with, their families. So all the things that are important and relevant to them. That's also part of child-centered language, but it's also part of meaningful discourse. So we want to do both, use child-centered language and have meaningful discourse. We also want to talk with children, not at them. So not just spitting things at them and telling them what to do and doing all the talking ourselves, but making it a back and forth conversation. That's called dialogic conversation, where we talk back and forth. I take a turn and then you take a turn. That helps children to build their conversation skills, their receptive language skills, their comprehension, their vocabulary, their ability to produce language. So good for many, many things. A way that we can engage children in two-way dialogue is to talk with them about things that require adding additional information to the conversation. So using something called elaborations, where we talk about things in an elaborative, detailed, descriptive way, and using open-ended questions, where we ask questions where we truly don't know the answer, and we're interested in the answers that children have to give. These kinds of statements, these elaborations, and these open-ended questions allow children to pitch into the conversation, to add on to the statements that we're making, to answer those questions that we're asking, so that they can both receive additional information from the adults surrounding them, but also contribute to adding information to the conversation as well. As I mentioned before, we need to respect and support dual language learners. So you can learn more about this at the link, Supporting English Language Learners in the Preschool Classroom. And also be on the lookout. Remember, I said that by school age, at very minimum, children should be able to produce speech sounds accurately. By 3, they should be pretty understandable even to unfamiliar adults. So if you find that a child seems to be having either receptive or expressive language speech problems, it's probably a good idea to refer them to either a speech or hearing specialist to make sure that they get those potential language issues or challenges resolved early so that it doesn't interfere with language development down the line. So now we're going to talk about literacy development, what skills children have, what literacy consists of, and how we can facilitate children's literacy development. So to start with, it's important to understand that literacy refers to both reading and writing. So when we're talking about how to facilitate literacy development, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to both of these basic skills that need to be facilitated for children, so reading and writing. So I know that there is a lot on this slide, but these are the things that children need, sort of basic behind the scenes skills that children need to be able to read and write effectively. So you can look at the little graphics to the right of the slide. One is related to writing and one is related to reading, but also to go through the text. So to be able to read well, children also need to be able to listen. So this goes back to language development. A lot of the prerequisites to being able to read well are actually language skills. So one is to be able to hear the sounds of language, to be able to listen effectively to stories. One is to have a good vocabulary. So the vocabulary that children have is one of the best predictors of how well they'll read. Children need to know a lot about things in the world. So it's easier to learn vocabulary when you have ideas and knowledge about the world around you, and then you're just putting labels onto those things that you're learning about and the things that you know. So that's called concept knowledge. Children need to be able to hear the sounds of language, as we talked about before, but this is specific not to just hear things in the world, but also to hear those distinct sounds that letters make. So to understand that, to be able to hear the k sound and the s, the o sound. So the next piece of that is not just being able to hear those sounds, but to know what letters those sounds go with. So phonological awareness is the ability to hear those sounds, even if you have no idea of what letters they go with, you can still hear different language sounds. And then we pair that with print principles or letter knowledge, knowing that an A is an A and then an A says A, knowing that a B is a B and a B says B. Then we can take those two pieces of knowledge, phonological awareness and print principles, and we can put it together to be able to read words. That's phonemic awareness. When we can pair the knowledge we have about different letters with the sounds that those letters make to be able to help read a word, that is phonemic awareness. Now, after we've used phonemic awareness for a while, and we are able to sound out words using what we know about the sounds of language and the letter names, then we can build up a vocabulary of sight words, words that we know how to read without having to use phonemic awareness to sound them out, and that's called sight word knowledge. And then finally, the last thing is syntax. And this is when we can read, and we're reading along, and we may not know what a word means, but we know by its placement in the sentence kind of what its purpose is. So maybe we're talking about, let's So I was in a class one time and I had a professor who was talking about an article that we had to read, and she said, "That was a very turgid article, wasn't it?" And I didn't exactly know what she meant by the word turgid, Turgid, but I figured it probably meant hard because it was a really hard article to read. And I went and looked it up later, and the word turgid means dense, murky, so kind of a difficult, dense, murky, hard to kind of get the main point kind of article. But I was able to use what I knew about grammar, where adjectives sit in sentences, and I knew enough about all the other words that I could kind of guess what that word was referring to, and that is the ability of children to use syntax. Now, in terms of writing, one of the skills that children need to have is fine motor skills, and that is reflected on the graph to the right, the one with the little pictures. Children need to have hand and finger strength. They need to be able to have hand-eye coordination, to be able to grip things in a particular way. That helps them in being able to write more effectively. But they also need to have visual perception skills. They need to understand that the direction of letters matters. You can't just put directions any old way. That we need to delineate or separate words when we're writing by putting a space in between them. If they don't have a space, then they're just a big giant long string of letters that don't mean anything. That when we're putting words and things on paper, we need to go from top to bottom and left to right, that makes sense. And also letter position. So you can't reverse letters. So you have to have things that go in a particular way, and letters have to be in a particular order, or they don't mean what we're intending them to mean. So in this slide, it shows you what children can typically do at various ages related to reading. So you can see that as early as 2, children can understand and enjoy simple storybooks, particularly those with lots of pictures. They may even hold a book and pretend to read. Once children are 3, they're able to repeat the text. They know that even if there are pictures, that's not entirely how a story gets told, that stories and books are both related to pictures and the words that are written. 4-year-olds might be able to actually recognize some letters that are written and recognize their own name in print. 5-year-olds know lots of different letters. They may be able to pick out words. So, if you're driving by a store, they may be able to notice particular words, maybe see the stop sign and know that says stop. So that's called environmental print, when we see words kind of out and about in the environment and are able to read those. 6- and 7-year-olds can read very easy stories. They're getting that phonemic awareness where they're putting the sounds of language together with the letters that they know. But they're not able to read fluently yet, so it's a little laborious and time-consuming for them. And then by 8, they should be able to read pretty well and can actually now, rather than just learning to read, they can read to learn. So they can read words to learn more about the world around them and the subjects that we're teaching them. Next, let's talk about the stages of writing that we expect to see. So in other words, what milestones we expect to see children exhibiting related to writing at different ages. So one thing I want to note is that all writing starts as scribbling. So when we talk about art skills and we talk about writing skills, we talk about starting at the same place. So all art, so all drawing and all writing starts with scribbling. And then it separates out once children get to preschool into writing words and letters and things like that, or drawing pictures, representations of objects in the environment. But the beginning is scribbling. So for our 2-year-olds, they begin to scribble. And if you look at the graphic on the right that says stages of emergent writing, you can see what those scribbles look like all the way up to what words might look like for older children in this age period. So 2-year-olds scribble, and then 3-year-olds, they are making pictures of things, so maybe like a face or a cat or a house. And then they are also creating scribbling that looks like writing. So it is shapes that look like letters or squiggles that go across the page from left to right and top to bottom. 4-year-olds are writing their names. They are writing strings of letter-like forms. So they might occasionally write a word. So if they know things like to, from, of, mom, they might write those kinds of things. 5-year-olds are starting to use something called phonetic writing, where you write the sounds that you hear in a word. So the word like, they probably will just write L-I-K rather than L-I-K-E because the E is silent and we don't hear it. So we are only writing the names of the letters that we can hear. That would be phonetic writing. So 6 and 7-year-olds are still using phonetic writing. They're getting a little closer to sometimes using traditional spelling, even when they are also using phonetic writing, where they're just writing what they hear. But they can write conventionally, spell conventionally for words that they use often. They are starting to leave spaces between words when they write. And then 8-year-olds are far enough along with their writing that they probably most generally use conventional things unless it's a word they haven't seen before. They can write different kinds of sentences. They can write short papers and revise them if need be. They can use source material to add to their writing. So by the time children get to 8, we're seeing much more sophistication in their writing skills and abilities. There are various things that we can do to help children be better at reading and writing. So I would encourage you to take a look at the 10-step list on the left-hand side of this slide. So it talks about some things that we can do, and then some of the other do is 1, make sure that children are good at speaking and listening, because those are the building blocks to reading and writing. Making sure children have good vocabulary, that they've seen written language, that they have all the kind of precursor skills. Make sure that children understand that writing is useful. Write is to be able to help us with our memory, to be able to convey information to other people for enjoyment and pleasure. So all the things that literacy, reading and writing are good for is important to help children to understand. You can read directions, you can read a recipe, so all kinds of important things there. Promoting both phonemic and phonological awareness, so making sure that children hear the sounds of language, and we can do that through books with rhyming words and songs with rhyming words and playing vowel clapping games and making silly stories with words that sound the same as each other, playing rhyming games. Also teaching children the names of the letters so that they can put that information together with the sounds they're hearing and use those to read words that they see in their environment. Encouraging children to use invented spelling. You can't use invented spelling or only spelling the sounds that you hear unless you have a good, solid understanding of phonics. Children to understand the relationship between letters and sounds. So writing in that way is actually practice, and eventually that practice writing will give way to conventional spelling. So don't be worried if they're inventing spelling, because that is a sign that they have all the abilities they need to read well. Make sure that children get opportunities to play with literacy materials, so put literacy materials in all different centers in early childhood classrooms. So give children things to write with and things to write on, and books and labels and signs and all kinds of things that give them access to reading materials in their play spaces, so that children have opportunities to both have access to literacy materials in traditional play spaces like blocks and dramatic play, but also that they have access to reading and writing specific materials like letter puzzles and desk to write on, mailboxes to leave mail for each other, so all different kinds of literacy play. Also thinking about how to incorporate children's home languages, so have written words in multiple languages, books in other languages, opportunities to speak and listen to other languages, the ability to write in another language. So if you draw a picture of a butterfly, it is perfectly okay to write butterfly in Spanish and write butterfly in English. It does not have to just be one way. To make sure that you are doing back and forth reading or dialogic reading with young children. So the kind of reading where children can ask questions and make predictions and interact with you as you are interacting with the book, rather than just having to sit and listen while you're being read to. It is fascinating to me. We know that being read to is one of the most important predictors of having literacy skills, in addition to your vocabulary and phonological awareness, hearing the sounds of language. Being read to is another good predictor. And only 48% of children in the US get read to every day. So most children aren't getting the opportunity to engage in an activity that is very likely to build better literacy skills. And then I would also encourage you to watch the video on this slide. It's just additional information and written in a different format that will help you to think about other ways that we can help children to develop their literacy skills. So we're going to shift over to creativity. So creativity is the ability to produce something novel or original. Now remember, for young children, they don't know everything that's out there, so they may create something and it's not actually novel or original, but that's okay because they don't know all the things that exist in the world. So when they create something, they believe that it is something that no one's created before. Young children are highly creative, so it is not hard for them to with new ways of doing things and new ways of representing things. And the other thing that's important to know about creativity is that typically we equate it to the arts. There are many other ways to be creative, but the arts are kind of, a standard for thinking about what it means to be creative. And there are two kinds of art endeavors that we normally think of when we think of creativity. One is the performing, the other is the visual arts. So the performing arts are music, dance, drama, things that you do with your body, and then somebody else can watch what's happening kind of in real time, or a recorded version of it. And then there is the visual arts. This would be sculptures, paintings, woven things, quilted things, so things that people put together, and then typically we look at them with our eyes rather than the performing arts that we may look at and listen to. So early skills in the creativity area. Remember, everything starts with scribbling. So I'm not going to focus on music and drama here, although I do want you to know that there is a developmental progression of children's music and drama skills. I focus on the performing arts. I'm going to focus on the visual arts and particularly drawing, because there are many milestones we would have to cover otherwise. So we're just going to arts and drawing. But remember that drawing, like writing, starts with scribbling. And then the 2-year-old, 3-year-old kind of period, those scribbles start delineating themselves and splitting off into both drawing and writing, but we're just talking about the drawing part right now. So first we have random scribbles, where it really is just random and the children don't have a particular plan for what they're doing. It's just kind of vague marks on paper without really any control or plan. That moves to controlled scribbling, so being able to control your writing utensil better, to create the shape that you set out to create. So if you wanted to create a circle, it looks like a circle when you're done. By age 3, scribbling may imitate more accurately the things that children are trying to create. So they can create pictures of things in the environment and may tell you about the picture that they've created. By age 4 and 5, children may create art and then name their work. They get very good at making straight lines and curved lines and drawing circles, and then they use those straight curved lines and circles to begin to create paintings or drawings of things that look like real stuff. So look like people, look like animals, look like objects. So they're taking all of the scribbles that they've been generating previously and using those to create various things in their environment. And you can see that in the picture to the left of the slide that says Stages of Drawing Development. So visual art drawing skills for older children, so children age 6 to 8. And you can see another sort of graphic representation on this slide to the right. It shows you from 2 to 10, and we can see how much sophistication happens and how much children's drawings change, how they go from those scribbles to making simple shapes, to using those simple shapes to create objects and represent people in their environment, and then on to very detailed drawings that look quite adult-like in nature. So from age 6 to 8, children have mastered all the shapes and draw very detailed images. They tend to draw things that they have personally experienced or have great interest in. So if a child is not interested in trucks, they're probably not going to draw trucks or not draw trucks well. But if they're interested in trucks, you may get a very detailed truck indeed. They are drawing people and animals and plants and other animals, and they're putting ground underneath them. So we can tell that they're not just floating in thin air anymore. They are much better at proportion, so not making the head super giant and the body itty bitty, but having proportion between those things. Spatial awareness, kind of knowing where things need to sit on the page to make clear where they are meant to exist, and their drawings become highly realistic. So many details that are accurate and bringing a lot of realism into their drawings. So finally, to wrap up, let's talk a little bit about how to promote children's creative development. So one is children just need time. We need to make sure that children have at least 60 minutes to play and openly explore materials in their classrooms. That's about how long is needed to get down deep into your work, and that's when creativity comes, is when we get down deep into our work, creative minds go. We need to give children lots of materials and lots of things that they can work with, lots of self-expressive activities. So lots of things to do dramatic play with, lots of things to build with, lots of things to paint and color and draw and create with, things to make textile arts and sculptural kinds of arts, woodworking, just anything that you can think of that helps children have more materials. Making sure that those materials are open-ended, that we're not telling children how to use them. So I want you to come over here and I want you to put this paint on this picture in this particular way, and I want your picture to look like this when you're done, and I want you to use the creative materials in this very specific fashion. But letting children just enjoy the process and create what they want to create And maybe they don't even create anything at all. Maybe they're exploring line or texture or the way light and dark colors work together with each other. And then maybe they'll create something with those skills that they're exercising. But worrying less about the product and worrying more about the process. Giving children lots of materials, so not just art and self-expressive materials, but placing those art and expressive materials in more than just the art center, putting them all around the classroom so that children can draw and use their creativity in various ways with various kinds of activities. Making sure that we offer children beautiful spaces, spaces that are aesthetically pleasing, that fuel our creative passions and our creative endeavors, allowing children to have much time in nature and outdoors and have access to that kind of. One very helpful thing we can do is not to engage in direct instruction, to allow children opportunities for free play and guided play, which we've talked about before. Watching those early academics where children are sitting at their desks doing the same thing at the same time in the same way with the same materials, those are not the kinds of creativity, and allow children to exercise those creative skills. And we know that creativity is part of the cognitive development package and that it is important for children's development and their healthy developmental outcomes.